The shelter was silent when 16-year-old Liam wheeled inside. He thought it would be just another visit, until his eyes met a battered dog named Shadow. The volunteers whispered. This animal feared everyone, trusted no one, shrinking from every human touch. But in a heartbeat, everything changed. Shadow stood, stepped forward, and pressed his scarred head into Liam's lap. Time stopped. In one breathtaking instant, the dog who feared everyone stepped forward. What happened next would stun everyone. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. A soft morning mist clung to the chain-link fences of Willow Creek Animal Shelter. The world felt hushed as if the day itself was holding its breath. Inside the long kennel corridor, the usual chorus of barks and excited whines had quieted to curious murmurs. Volunteers moved between enclosures, sweeping and refilling bowls, their green shirts a bright splash against the gray dawn. Down the gravel driveway, the faint hum of tires broke the stillness. A silver van turned in slowly and stopped near the entrance. From the passenger side, a teenage boy emerged. First the glint of a wheelchair ramp unfolding, then a slim figure rolling carefully onto the path. His name was Liam. At 16, he carried himself with a calm grace that made people pause. The morning breeze caught the hood of his navy sweatshirt as he adjusted his wheels and looked toward the kennels. The staff had been expecting him. A visitor's log lay open at the front desk, but more than paperwork stirred the shelter today. There was a quiet anticipation, a sense that something meaningful was about to unfold. The animals seemed to feel it too. A few dogs pressed their noses to the wire, tails wagging in cautious rhythm. Liam's parents followed close behind, exchanging polite smiles with the volunteers. A gentle smile flickered on Liam's face as he took in the sights and sounds, rustling leaves, distant birdsong, and the earthy scent of straw and soap. He wasn't here just to see dogs. He had read about the shelter's work rescuing abused and abandoned animals, and something deep inside had told him this visit mattered. None of them, neither the boy in the wheelchair nor the staff who welcomed him, knew that a single encounter today would change every heart in that shelter, forever. Before the accident, Liam's life had been all speed and motion. At 14, he loved weekend bike trails and neighborhood soccer matches that stretched past sunset. But one rainy afternoon changed everything. A car skidded on a slick corner, and in an instant, the world he knew collapsed. The spinal injury left him unable to walk. Doctors warned that recovery would be slow and uncertain. For months, hospital rooms replaced classrooms. He watched seasons change through a single window, wrestling with frustration and the heavy silence of lost freedom. Yet even then, something steady kept him from giving up. He began sketching landscapes in a notebook, tracing each line as if drawing new paths for himself. When physical therapy sessions pushed his limits, he surprised everyone, including his therapists, by greeting every setback with quiet determination. His parents noticed that resilience most. They saw it in the way he learned to maneuver the wheelchair with graceful precision, and in the late-night talks when he insisted he would still travel, still dream, still help others. Friends drifted in and out, but Liam never blamed them. Instead, he focused on small victories, mastering ramps, rebuilding strength in his arms, finding new ways to play music with his guitar resting across his lap. Animals had always been part of Liam's story. He used to rescue injured birds and coax stray cats with patient hands. After the accident, that pull toward animals deepened. He read about therapy dogs that comfort hospital patients and watched endless videos of rescues finding homes. Something in those loyal eyes mirrored his own fight to heal. So when his mother mentioned the local shelter visit, Liam felt a quiet spark of purpose. He wasn't looking for pity or distraction. He longed for connection, perhaps even to help another life rediscover trust, the way he was learning to trust his own strength again. Rolling into Willow Creek that morning, Liam carried more than physical courage. He carried a heart still wide open, ready for whatever miracle might meet him beyond those kennel doors. Willow Creek Animal Shelter sat at the edge of town like a quiet promise. From the outside it looked simple, a low row of brick buildings shaded by tall oaks, but inside, every corner held stories of survival. Morning light filtered through mesh doors, catching the motes of hay dust that danced in the air. The gentle rhythm of paws on concrete echoed like a heartbeat through the halls. Each kennel framed a different chapter. To the left, an old beagle wagged patiently, his cloudy eyes reflecting years of wandering streets. Across the aisle, a playful litter of kittens tumbled over one another, their tiny mews bright against the soft hum of ceiling fans. Volunteers moved from pen to pen with practiced care, checking water bowls, straightening blankets, whispering kind words that seemed to settle nervous tales. But at the far end of the corridor, behind a slightly rusted gate, was a space set apart. The staff called it the Quiet Run. Here lived animals whose pasts had left deeper scars, dogs rescued from cruelty cases, pets abandoned after years of neglect, souls that needed more than routine feeding and cleaning. The Quiet Run was where trust had to be rebuilt grain by grain. One kennel there held a mystery that even seasoned staff spoke about in hushed tones. Inside rested a cream-colored dog with dark, watchful eyes. He rarely barked. Instead, he stayed curled in a corner, muscles tense as if braced for a blow that never came. Weeks of gentle coaxing hadn't broken through his guarded silence. Food and clean bedding kept him alive, but something inside him stayed locked away. The volunteers often wondered what nightmare had taught him to fear human touch so completely. Records hinted at an abusive past, but details were scarce. Only one fact was certain: he never approached anyone. Visitors would stop, whisper soft greetings, and move on, hearts heavy. As Liam's wheelchair rolled closer down the center aisle, the usual chatter faded. The staff exchanged quiet glances. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it, that the next few moments in this quiet corner might rewrite the hardest story the shelter had ever held. The moment Liam's wheels eased onto the last stretch of the kennel aisle, a hush seemed to settle over the building. Even the usual scuffle of paws and jingling of metal tags faded. Volunteers paused mid-task, exchanging glances heavy with an unspoken understanding. Everyone at Willow Creek knew the silent dog in the far corner, and the painful rumors that clung to his name like a shadow. His intake papers read only Rescue Case Number 47, but the staff had given him a gentler name: Shadow. Months earlier, animal control officers had found him wandering behind an abandoned warehouse, ribs showing, a length of frayed rope still tied to his collar. There were faint scars across his back and a jagged mark on one ear. The vet said the wounds told a story of beatings and confinement, though no one knew for how long. Despite the warmth and routine care of the shelter, Shadow never fully came back to life. He ate only when no one was watching. Loud noises made him flinch violently. If a stranger reached a hand toward the bars, he shrank to the farthest corner, eyes dark and unreadable. More than once, volunteers left his kennel fighting tears, wondering if he'd ever trust again. "Don't be disappointed if he doesn't come close," whispered Claire, the senior caretaker, bending toward Liam as they approached. "We give him space. He needs time." Her voice carried both caution and quiet hope. Liam nodded, his gaze steady on the dim figure curled on the blanket. From a distance, Shadow looked almost like a statue carved from cream and rust. But even in stillness, there was a restless tension, a heart that wanted connection but feared it more. The air thickened with expectancy. Behind them, two other volunteers clasped their hands, barely breathing. They had seen countless families pass by this kennel without a single wag or greeting. Yet something about today felt different, as if an invisible thread was pulling the boy in the wheelchair and the haunted dog toward the same fragile point. No one spoke. They simply watched, waiting to see whether this broken soul would remain hidden or take a step no one dared hope for. Liam eased his wheelchair closer until the rubber wheels rested just a few feet from the kennel door. The soft creak of metal echoed in the still corridor. For a long moment, nothing happened. Shadow remained curled tightly in the far corner, head lowered, eyes half hidden beneath his paws. The boy and the dog existed in a quiet standoff, two worlds separated by a thin grid of wire and a lifetime of pain. Instead of calling out, Liam simply waited. He rested his hands lightly on his lap, letting the faint shelter sounds, dripping water, distant bird calls fill the silence. His breathing slowed until it matched the dog's faint, cautious rhythm. Something unspoken began to settle in the space between them, a language without words. A flicker of movement broke the stillness. Shadow lifted his head just enough for one dark eye to catch the morning light. For the first time, he truly looked at the visitor. His ears twitched, uncertain, and a slow blink followed, A small gesture, but to the staff watching from a respectful distance, it felt monumental. Claire held her breath. She had spent weeks trying to earn a single glance from this dog. Now he was not only looking, he was studying. Liam met the gaze without flinching, his calm presence like a quiet invitation. He didn't stretch out a hand or coax with treats. He simply stayed, his eyes soft and steady. Shadow shifted, uncoiling inch by inch. One paw edged forward on the blanket, then another. The sound of nails on concrete was barely audible, yet it sent a ripple of astonishment through the hallway. The dog rose to a cautious stand, body trembling as if unsure of its own decision. Their eyes locked again, boy and dog, two survivors of very different battles, and something unseen passed between them. Recognition, maybe even trust. For the first time since his rescue, Shadow took a step toward the door. Gasps escaped from the volunteers behind them. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes bright with sudden hope. In that quiet, fragile moment, everyone knew they were witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. The room seemed to tighten with anticipation as Shadow stood frozen just inside the kennel door. His tail hung low, trembling slightly, but he didn't retreat. For weeks the staff had coaxed with toys and treats. Now he moved forward for none of those things, only toward the quiet boy in the wheelchair. Liam didn't rush him. He tilted his head gently, offering a faint smile as if to say, "Take your time." The boy's stillness spoke louder than any words. He rested his palms on his knees, keeping them open and relaxed. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, the only sound breaking the silence. One careful step, then another. Shadow's paws scraped lightly against the concrete floor, each movement a test of trust. The scar along his ear twitched, a memory of pain lingering like a ghost, yet he kept moving. When he reached the wire door, he stopped and lifted his nose, inhaling Liam's scent, a mix of soap, cotton, and something calm that carried no threat. Claire's heart pounded. She glanced at the other volunteers, eyes wide with disbelief. They had seen families offer treats, kind words, even hours of patient sitting, and still Shadow never budged. Yet now, with no coaxing at all, he pressed his muzzle to the bars and let out a low, tentative whine. Liam's parents watched in stunned silence. The boy slowly extended a single hand through the opening, palm up, fingers motionless. For a breathless second, the world held still. Then Shadow leaned forward, touched his nose to Liam's skin, and exhaled a long, shuddering breath, as though releasing months of fear. The volunteers gasped. Claire's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just progress. It was a leap across an invisible chasm of mistrust. Shadow stayed there, muzzle resting lightly on Liam's palm, eyes softening with every heartbeat. In that instant, barriers built by pain and neglect began to crumble. A broken dog and a resilient boy had found each other, and everyone present knew they were witnessing a quiet miracle unfold right before their eyes. For a few heartbeats, nobody spoke. The only sound in the kennel corridor was the soft, rhythmic breathing of boy and dog. Shadow's nose remained pressed to Liam's open hand, and it felt as though time itself had paused to witness the fragile miracle. Then whispers rippled through the hallway. "Oh my goodness," one volunteer breathed, her clipboard forgotten at her side. "Is this really happening?" Another murmured, her eyes wide with disbelief. Claire, the senior caretaker who had spent endless shifts trying to reach Shadow, stepped forward almost involuntarily. Her voice caught in her throat. He's never done this. Not once." The words trembled out like a secret too long held. Even the animals sensed the shift. Nearby kennels, once alive with restless energy, had gone strangely calm. Dogs that usually barked at every visitor sat quietly, ears tilted as if they too recognized the weight of the moment. Liam's parents exchanged stunned glances. His mother's hand pressed against her heart while his father, normally reserved, whispered, "It's like they were waiting for each other." Claire knelt carefully beside the kennel door, her eyes glistening. "Shadow," she said softly, "is this what you've been waiting for all this time?" Her voice cracked with equal parts awe and gratitude. Shadow barely flicked an ear in her direction. His entire attention was on Liam. When the boy gently shifted his wheelchair to a more comfortable angle, the dog instinctively stepped closer, resting the side of his face against the metal bars as if to erase even the thin distance left between them. A volunteer at the far end quietly pulled out her phone to capture the scene. But even she hesitated, afraid a single sound might break the spell. What they were witnessing wasn't just trust, it was transformation. Claire finally exhaled, a shaky smile breaking through her tears. "I think," she whispered, "we've just seen the moment he chose life again." Around her, heads nodded in silent agreement. In that humble shelter hallway, hearts were quietly rearranged. Everyone knew they weren't simply caring for rescued animals anymore. They had just watched love rewrite a broken story in real time. The soft rattle of the kennel latch echoed like a heartbeat. Claire slid the door open with slow, deliberate care, her hands trembling from equal parts excitement and caution. For weeks, the latch had meant nothing to Shadow but cleaning time or meals. Today it carried an invitation. Liam stayed perfectly still, his lap a quiet landscape of denim and folded hands. Shadow hesitated at the threshold, muscles taut as a drawn bow. Then almost imperceptibly he stepped forward. One paw touched the cool hallway floor, then another. Every inch he closed was a victory over the ghosts of his past. When he finally reached Liam's wheelchair, he paused, head tilted slightly, ears flicking to the soft hum of ceiling fans. His eyes searched Liam's face as if reading a silent map. The boy's gaze remained calm, open. Slowly, Liam lowered one hand, letting it hover in the air. Shadow leaned in, the tip of his nose brushing Liam's fingers. A deep breath escaped him, long and tremulous as though he were exhaling months of fear. Encouraged, Liam moved his hand gently to the side of Shadow's neck, fingertips barely grazing the fur. The dog did not flinch. Instead, he closed his eyes and inched closer until the weight of his head settled fully across Liam's lap. Gasps filled the hallway. Claire pressed her palms together, fighting tears. A volunteer whispered, "He's never let anyone touch him like that." Liam's parents stood transfixed. His mother covered her mouth while his father wiped the corner of an eye he pretended wasn't wet. The boy bent forward slightly, resting his cheek against the dog's warm head. "It's okay," Liam whispered, his voice steady and soft. "You're safe now." Shadow's breathing slowed to match Liam's heartbeat, the two rhythms melting into one quiet song of trust. Around them, the shelter seemed to fade away. In that circle of warmth, a wheelchair, a wounded dog, and shared stillness, something more powerful than words took root, a healing neither had thought possible. For a long, quiet stretch, no one moved. Shadow remained draped across Liam's lap as though he had found a place he had been seeking all his life. His breathing grew slow and steady, each exhale a soft sigh against the boy's jeans. Around them, the world seemed to shrink to the sound of their shared calm. Finally, Claire drew a careful breath and stepped closer. Her voice was low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might undo the fragile trust blooming before her eyes. "There's something you should know about Shadow," she began, glancing at Liam's parents, then back at the boy who stroked the dog's neck with gentle fingers. She crouched beside the wheelchair, her eyes shimmering. When animal control found him, he was tied behind an abandoned warehouse. The rope was so tight it left marks that may never completely fade. There were scars across his back and legs, signs of repeated beatings. "We think he went hungry for weeks." Her voice cracked on the last words. Liam's hand stilled for a moment on Shadow's fur. He looked down at the dog, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding that came from his own long nights of pain and struggle. "I know what it's like," he said softly, "to hurt and wonder if things will ever feel normal again." Shadow shifted slightly as if those words seeped right through the language barrier. He pressed his head more firmly into Liam's lap, a small whine escaping his throat, half sigh, half confession. Claire wiped at the corner of her eyes. "We tried everything to reach him," she admitted. "Treats, hours of sitting nearby, even other calm dogs for company. But he never let anyone close. Until now." Liam's mother swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like he was waiting for someone who understood." In that hushed space, the scars on Shadow's body were no longer just marks of cruelty. They were symbols of battles survived. And the boy who bore invisible scars of his own had become the first person to help those wounds finally begin to heal. The shelter hallway fell into a stillness so deep it felt sacred. Morning light spilled through the high windows, painting soft stripes across the floor where Liam sat with Shadow resting heavily in his lap. Words seemed unnecessary, almost intrusive. Something more powerful was happening in silence. Liam traced gentle circles through Shadow's fur, feeling the subtle rise and fall of each breath. In that quiet rhythm, memories flickered across his mind. The sterile hospital lights after his accident, The lonely hours when he wondered if he'd ever walk again. The nights when pain felt bigger than hope. He didn't need to speak those memories aloud. Somehow the dog seemed to know. Shadow's eyes half closed, but they never left Liam's face. His body, once rigid with suspicion, melted with each stroke of the boy's hand. A low, contented rumble, more vibration than sound, escaped his chest. It wasn't the loud bark of joy other dogs gave. It was softer, deeper, like a whispered acknowledgement. I see you. I feel you. We are the same. Claire watched with her heart caught in her throat. She had seen therapy animals comfort people, but this felt different, like two survivors trading stories without a single word. It's as if they're speaking in a language only they understand, she murmured to a fellow volunteer, who could only nod, eyes wet. Liam leaned forward until his forehead rested lightly against Shadow's ear. You're safe now, he whispered, not for anyone else to hear. No one will hurt you again. We'll heal together. The words floated between them, absorbed as naturally as breathing. Shadow responded not with movement but with stillness, pressing closer, his heartbeat aligning with Liam's in a quiet pact. Around them the shelter and its sounds, footsteps, distant barking, faded to nothing. Only their shared space remained. In that wordless conversation of scars and second chances, boy and dog discovered a bond beyond rescue forms or medical charts. It was a promise, silent, unbreakable, that both of their lives could begin again, together. A sudden clap of thunder rolled in the distance, low and rumbling. Though the sky above remained a washed-out blue, the sound drifted through the shelter like an old echo, and every dog along the corridor startled. Every dog except Shadow. Instead, something remarkable happened. He lifted his head from Liam's lap, ears pricked toward the sound, then turned back to the boy with an intensity that made everyone hold their breath. Slowly, deliberately, Shadow climbed higher until his front paws rested on the side of Liam's wheelchair. It was a small motion but filled with a quiet purpose, as if he were standing guard. The volunteers froze. Claire's hand tightened on the latch she'd never closed, her heart pounding. He's protecting him, she whispered. Another roll of thunder trembled through the air, and a brief flash of light flickered through the window. A few other dogs barked nervously. Shadow didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed closer, his chest against Liam's knees. His eyes locked on the boy's face. It was as if he were saying, I'm here. Nothing will harm you. Liam felt the weight of that pledge through the metal frame of his chair. A surge of warmth, something stronger than mere comfort, rose in his chest. He had spent months being the one protected by doctors, parents, therapists. Now, for the first time since his accident, someone, something, was standing protectively over him. The shelter seemed to hold its breath. Even the distant barking faded, replaced by the rhythmic beat of two hearts sinking in perfect trust. No one spoke. The air felt thick with something almost electric, a quiet miracle unfolding in real time. Shadow lowered his head until his muzzle rested gently against Liam's shoulder, sealing the moment like a vow. In that heartbeat, boy and dog became more than companions. They were guardians of each other's wounds, each silently promising that whatever storms lay ahead, real or remembered, they would face them side by side. The hush inside the shelter deepened until every breath, every heartbeat felt amplified. Shadow remained draped across Liam's shoulder, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. It was as if the world beyond those kennel walls had disappeared, leaving only this single moment of trust. Claire blinked hard, but tears welled anyway, blurring her view of the boy and dog. She wasn't alone. One volunteer lowered her phone, too choked up to film. Another covered her mouth to stifle a soft sob. For months they had cleaned and fed Shadow, wondering if he'd ever accept kindness. Now, right before them, he was giving his whole heart. Liam's parents stood a few steps back, overcome. His mother pressed her palms to her cheeks as tears slid freely, her eyes shining with a mixture of awe and gratitude. His father, quiet and steady through every hospital stay and therapy session, couldn't stop his own eyes from glistening. I've never seen anything like this, he whispered hoarsely. Even the other animals seemed to honor the moment. Dogs that usually barked at every sound now sat silently, ears tilted toward the pair as though recognizing a sacred promise. The shelter, normally alive with movement, felt like a chapel of soft light and beating hearts. Liam, sensing the shift around him, gently stroked Shadow's head. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice catching. "We're both safe now." The words were simple, but everyone who heard them felt the weight behind them, months of pain, fear, and resilience distilled into a single shared truth. Claire finally stepped forward, kneeling to meet Liam's gaze. Her own voice trembled. "You've done something none of us could," she said. "You gave him trust back." A quiet sniffle broke the stillness, then another. Around the room, people wiped their eyes, smiling through their tears. What they had witnessed wasn't just a boy comforting a broken dog. It was the healing of two wounded souls, each unlocking the other's hope. For that one luminous moment, every person in the shelter felt changed, reminded that love, when freely given, can turn even the deepest scars into something beautiful. The spell of silence lingered, but beneath it new energy began to stir. Claire gently cleared her throat, her eyes still bright with tears. "Liam," she said softly, "there's something we need to talk about." Liam looked up, his hand never leaving Shadow's neck. The dog barely moved, as though he feared the moment might vanish if he shifted. Claire exchanged a quick glance with Liam's parents. "For months we've hoped someone might earn Shadow's trust," she continued, her voice hushed with wonder. "But that we've never seen a connection like this. Not once. If you and your family are willing, we'd love to discuss adoption." The words hung in the air like a gentle bell. Liam's mother gasped quietly, pressing a hand to her chest. His father's brow furrowed, not from doubt but from the weight of an unexpected possibility. Liam's heart thudded in his chest. Adoption. The idea felt both enormous and perfectly right. He looked down at Shadow, who was still leaning heavily against him, eyes soft and unwavering. It was as though the dog understood every word, waiting for the answer with quiet patience. His mother knelt beside the chair, her eyes shimmering. "Liam," she whispered, "is this what you want?" He didn't need to think. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the lump rising in his throat. More than anything, Shadow let out a faint whine, almost a sigh of relief, and pressed closer, sealing the decision with a gesture beyond words. Claire smiled through her tears. "Then we'll start the paperwork. We'll make sure everything is ready for him to come home with you." Around them, volunteers beamed and exchanged hugs. The corridor that once held only caution now pulsed with hope. Liam stroked the dog's fur, his own eyes damp but bright. "You're coming home," he whispered. "We'll heal together every step of the way." In that instant, the boy who once feared his world had shrunk forever, and the dog who thought kindness was lost both discovered the same truth. Love can rewrite even the hardest destinies. 2 weeks later, the front door of Liam's home opened to the sound of soft paws on hardwood. Shadow stepped inside cautiously, his nose twitching as he took in the new world of warm light and gentle voices. Gone were the cold concrete walls and echoing barks of the shelter. Here sunlight pooled on cozy rugs and the faint smell of homemade soup lingered in the air. Liam guided his wheelchair forward, smiling as Shadow's tail flicked in tentative excitement. "Welcome home," he said softly, patting his lap. Without hesitation, Shadow patted over and rested his chin where it belonged, as if he had always known this was his place. The days that followed unfolded like a quiet miracle. Morning routines became shared rituals. Liam would wheel into the backyard to feel the crisp air while Shadow trotted at his side, ears perked for neighborhood sounds. Neighbors stopped to watch, marveling at the graceful dance between boy and dog, two survivors moving in perfect harmony. Physical therapy sessions changed too. Where once Liam struggled with lonely exercises, now Shadow lay patiently beside the mat, offering a steady presence that turned effort into partnership. Therapists noticed the difference: longer stretches, steadier focus, and a new spark of determination that words alone could never have inspired. At night, when pain sometimes returned like an unwelcome echo, Shadow climbed onto the rug near Liam's bed and stayed until morning. The soft rhythm of his breathing became a lullaby stronger than any medicine. Even beyond their home, their story began to ripple outward. Friends visited and left inspired. Social media posts of their bond spread hope to strangers who needed proof that broken hearts, human or animal, can heal. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the living room floor, Liam whispered into Shadow's fur, "You saved me as much as I saved you." The dog responded with a slow, gentle wag, as if to say he already knew. Together, they were no longer defined by accidents or abuse. They were proof that love can transform pain into strength and that sometimes family finds you when you least expect it. Weeks later, the story of Liam and Shadow had already begun to travel far beyond their quiet street. Neighbors told friends, local news picked it up, and soon strangers from distant towns sent letters and messages filled with gratitude and awe. But inside their home, life remained beautifully simple. Mornings began with the soft sound of paws and the creak of Liam's wheelchair as they set off for their daily backyard ritual. Evenings ended with Shadow stretched at the foot of Liam's bed, breathing in peaceful sync. One crisp afternoon, Liam sat by the living room window, sunlight spilling across the floor like a golden blanket. Shadow lay beside him, chin on the boy's lap, eyes half closed in contentment. Liam's mother stood quietly in the doorway, watching the pair with a smile that held every ounce of relief and pride she felt. His father joined her, their hands meeting in a silent squeeze. "You've both come so far," his mother said softly. Liam looked up and nodded. "We both needed each other," he replied. "Maybe we were meant to meet all along." Shadow lifted his head at the sound of Liam's voice and gave a slow, gentle wag of his tail, an answer clearer than words. In that simple movement lived every chapter of their journey, the fear that once held them apart, the quiet trust that brought them together, and the new life they had built side by side. For those who hear their story, there's a reminder waiting. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a silent companion, steady and unshakable, changing everything without fanfare. Healing, too, can be quiet, unfolding in the steady rhythm of shared days and wordless understanding. As this video comes to a close, let Liam and Shadow's bond speak to you. Somewhere near you, an animal waits with a heart ready to forgive and a spirit ready to love. And maybe, like Liam, you'll discover that in offering rescue, you're rescued too. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more real stories of courage, connection, and second chances, because sometimes the smallest acts of love create the biggest miracles.